The laboratory hummed with the soft whir of quantum processors, their crystalline cores pulsing with ethereal blue light. Dr. Marcus Reed stood before the towering dimensional resonance chamber, his weathered hands trembling slightly as he made final adjustments to the probability matrix. At 63, he had dedicated his entire life to understanding the fundamental forces that held reality together. But today felt different. Today, he was about to peer beyond the veil that separated dimensions. The Galactic Science Consortium had been skeptical when Marcus first proposed his theory of dimensional bleed-through. The Altarian mathematicians dismissed it as primitive human conjecture, while the vegan physicists politely suggested he focus on more achievable pursuits. Even his human colleagues at the Terra Station Research Facility had raised eyebrows. When he requested access to the experimental quantum tunneling array, but Marcus knew something they didn't. Humans possessed an intuitive understanding of chaos, theory that even the most advanced alien civilizations couldn't replicate. Where other species saw disorder, humans saw patterns. Where others calculated probabilities, humans felt possibilities. Computer, initiate preliminary scan of dimensional membrane stability, Marcus commanded, his voice echoing in the vast chamber. The artificial intelligence responded in its calm, synthesized tone, membrane integrity at 97.4%. Quantum fluctuations within acceptable parameters. Warning: attempting to breach dimensional barriers carries significant risk of cascading failure. Marcus smiled grimly. Risk was humanity's middle name. Every great discovery in human history had come from someone willing to push beyond the boundaries of what was considered safe or reasonable. From the first human who decided to harness fire, to the pioneers who ventured into the darkness of space, progress demanded courage. Override safety protocols. Authorization: Read Alpha 779. The machine's protest was immediate. Dr. Reed, I must advise against. Override acknowledged, Marcus interrupted. Begin dimensional probe sequence. The chamber filled with an otherworldly hum as exotic matter began cycling through the resonance coils. Reality itself seemed to ripple around the edges of the experimental apparatus, creating prismatic distortions that hurt to look at directly. Marcus felt his heart racing, not from fear, but from the intoxicating rush of standing at the precipice of the unknown. Through the observation portal, he watched as space-time began to bend and fold like origami made of starlight. The dimensional membrane, that gossamer-thin barrier between parallel realities, started to show hairline fractures. Each crack revealed glimpses of worlds beyond imagination, landscapes painted in impossible colors, structures that defied geometry, and entities that moved according to physics that shouldn't exist. Then he saw her dot in one of the fractured dimensional windows. A figure moved with fluid grace through what appeared to be a crystalline forest. She was humanoid, but clearly not. Human, her skin held an opalescent quality that shifted between silver and gold, and her movements suggested a different relationship with gravity. When she turned toward the dimensional breach, their eyes met across the gulf between realities. Every great bond starts with a single moment of courage. HFY Chronicle Stories is just beginning, and your support matters. If you love emotional, sci-fi tales, forbidden connections, and stories that stay with you, hit subscribe. It's free, and it helps us bring more stories from the stars to you. The connection lasted only seconds, but in that brief moment, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in decades of scientific pursuit. Wonder mixed with an inexplicable sense of recognition. The being on the other side seemed equally transfixed, reaching toward the dimensional rift with one graceful hand. Then everything went wrong. The dimensional membrane didn't just tear, it exploded outward like a soap bubble struck by lightning. Alarms shrieked throughout the Terra station as reality itself began to unravel at the quantum level. Marcus was thrown backward by a wave of exotic energy that tasted of copper and starlight. his body slamming against the laboratory wall with enough force to crack his ribs. Emergency containment. Fields snapped into place around the resonance chamber, but they were designed to handle conventional energy discharges, not the fundamental breakdown of dimensional boundaries. The exotic matter that had been carefully contained within the experimental apparatus now poured out like liquid fire, spreading across the laboratory floor and beginning to eat through the station's hull. Station-wide emergency, the facilities. AI announced in multiple languages and species-specific communication frequencies. Dimensional breach detected in Laboratory 7. All personnel evacuate to minimum safe distance of 50,000 kilometers. Repeat, this is not a drill. Marcus struggled to his feet, tasting blood where he'd bitten his tongue. Through the chaos of flashing lights and screaming alarms, he could see that the dimensional rift was still growing. What had started as a hairline crack in reality was now a swirling vortex 3 meters wide. And through it, he could see not just the crystalline forest where he'd glimpsed the mysterious being, but fragments of dozens of other realities bleeding through. Commander Elena Vasquez burst through the laboratory doors, her military training evident in the way she assessed the situation in seconds. The station's security chief was one of the few people Marcus considered a friend, and right now, her face was a mask of controlled terror. "What did you do, Marcus?" she demanded, grabbing his arm to steady him. "I made contact," he gasped, pointing toward the dimensional rift. "There's someone on the other side." Someone who, his words were cut off as another wave of exotic energy pulsed from the breach. This time, it wasn't just energy that emerged. Creatures began to step through the rift, beings that seemed to be composed of living mathematics, their forms shifting and recalculating with each movement. They moved with predatory intent, their presence causing the very air around them to crystallize into geometric patterns. "Those aren't from the same dimension as your mystery woman," Elena observed with characteristic directness. "And they don't look friendly." She was right. While the opalescent being he'd encountered had radiated curiosity and intelligence, these mathematical entities felt alien in a way that made his bones ache. They were explorers of sorts, but their exploration seemed to involve converting everything they encountered into extensions of their own reality. The first creature touched the laboratory wall, and Marcus watched in horrified fascination as the metal began to transform. Complex equations appeared on the surface like living tattoos, and the wall itself started to take on impossible angles that hurt to perceive directly. Whatever these beings were, they were turning his laboratory into something that operated according to their own twisted version of physics. "We need to evacuate," Elena said, pulling him toward the exit. "The entire station needs to be abandoned." "No," Marcus said, breaking free from her grip. "If we run, this will spread. These beings, they're not just passing through. They're colonizing our reality, converting it piece by piece. In a few hours, this entire sector of space could be transformed into something unrecognizable." Elena's face went pale. "What are you suggesting?" Marcus looked back at the growing rift, his mind racing through possibilities. The mathematical entities were pouring through faster now, their presence beginning to affect the fundamental constants of local space-time. The speed of light was fluctuating, gravity was becoming inconsistent, and the electromagnetic spectrum was developing new colors that didn't have names. "I need to get back to the controls," he said. "There might be a way to reverse the process, but I need to stabilize the dimensional membrane first." "You'll be killed the moment you get close to that thing." Marcus smiled grimly. "Maybe, but humans have always been good at finding solutions to impossible problems. We don't give up when the universe tells us something can't be done. We find a way to prove it wrong." The mathematical entities had transformed half the laboratory into something that resembled a fever dream conceived by a geometry textbook. Walls bent at angles that shouldn't exist, creating spaces that were somehow larger inside than outside. The floor had become a tessellation of moving patterns that made Marcus's eyes water when he tried to focus on them directly. But he pressed forward anyway, because that's what humans did when faced with the impossible. Elena had reluctantly agreed to help, though she'd made it clear she thought they were both about to die in particularly unpleasant ways. She provided covering fire with a modified plasma rifle, its energy bolts temporarily disrupting the mathematical entities when they got too close. The creatures didn't seem to feel pain in any conventional sense, but they did respond to sufficient electromagnetic interference by briefly losing coherence. "I count at least 30 of them," Elena called out, ducking behind an equipment console that was slowly transforming into something resembling a hypercube. "And more are coming through every minute." Marcus reached the control panel for the dimensional resonance chamber, his fingers flying over interfaces that were becoming increasingly distorted by the spreading mathematical contamination. The readings were beyond anything in his experience dimensional. Membrane integrity had dropped to -7%, which should have been physically impossible. That's when he realized the true scope of his mistake. The dimensional barrier hadn't just been damaged, it had been fundamentally rewritten. The mathematical entities weren't breaking through from another dimension. They were converting the barrier itself into a permanent gateway. Every second that passed, more of baseline reality was being transformed into a hybrid space that existed according to rules from multiple universes simultaneously. "The cascade effect is accelerating," he told Elena, his voice tight with concentration. "At this rate, the contamination will reach the nearest inhabited system within 6 hours. 2 billion Centauri colonists will be transformed into living equations. Can you stop it?" Marcus's hands hesitated over the controls. The honest answer was no, at least not with conventional technology. But humans had never been limited by conventional thinking. They excelled at finding creative solutions precisely because they were willing to consider options that other species deemed impossible or insane. "There might be a way," he said slowly, "but it requires something that goes against every principle of dimensional physics." Instead of trying to repair the dimensional membrane, Marcus began reconfiguring the resonance chamber to create a controlled implosion. If he could collapse the dimensional rift on itself, the resulting quantum vacuum might be enough to cauterize the breach. The risk was enormous. If he miscalculated, the implosion could spread outward, potentially unraveling the fabric of spacetime across several star systems. But the alternative was certain catastrophe. As he worked, Marcus found himself thinking about the opalescent being he'd glimpsed in that first moment of contact. She had seemed to recognize him, as if their brief encounter had meaning beyond mere coincidence. In all his years of scientific research, he had never encountered anything that suggested consciousness could transcend dimensional boundaries. Yet something about that moment had felt like destiny. "Implosion sequence initialized," the laboratory's AI announced, its voice now distorted by the mathematical contamination affecting its processors. "Warning, probability of successful containment is 7.3%. Probability of cascade failure resulting in local spacetime collapse is 81.4%. Elena looked at him with a mixture of admiration and exasperation. "Those are terrible odds, Marcus." "They're human odds," he replied, reaching for the activation control. "We've built our entire civilization on 7% chances and stubborn refusal to accept defeat." Just as his finger touched the control surface, something unexpected happened. The opalescent being from the other dimension appeared at the edge of the dimensional rift, no longer just a glimpse but fully present in his reality. She moved with purpose, her form somehow remaining stable despite the chaotic mathematics that were converting everything around her. When she spoke, her voice resonated with harmonics that suggested communication beyond mere words. "Wait, your solution will work, but at terrible cost. There's another way, one that requires trust between worlds." Marcus's hand froze over the activation control. Around them, the mathematical entities continued their relentless transformation of reality, but the presence of this new being seemed to slow their progress. For the first time since the disaster began, he felt something other than desperation. He felt hope. The opalescent being stepped fully through the dimensional rift, and Marcus felt reality stabilize around her presence, like iron filings aligning with a magnetic field. She was even more striking in person. Her skin contained depths that seemed to hold entire galaxies, and her eyes reflected light in ways that suggested she perceived spectrums beyond human imagination. But it was her expression of determined compassion that struck him most profoundly. "I am called Lyra," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate directly with his consciousness. "I have been watching your species for some time, and I know what you are attempting to do. The implosion will work, but it will also create a wound in spacetime that takes centuries to heal. Your people will pay that price for generations." Elena kept her plasma rifle trained on the mathematical entities, which had slowed their advance but hadn't stopped entirely. "So what's this other way you mentioned? Because we're running out of time for lengthy explanations." Lyra gestured toward the growing dimensional rift, her movements causing the exotic energy flows to shift into more stable patterns. "The breach cannot be closed from one side alone. It requires conscious will from multiple dimensions working in harmony. Your species has something unique, the ability to perceive patterns in chaos. My people have something different, the ability to sing reality into new configurations." Marcus stared at her, his scientific mind racing through the implications. "You're talking about some kind of collaborative dimensional engineering. But the mathematics alone would be staggeringly complex." "Mathematics are just one language for describing reality," Lyra replied. "Music is another. What you call quantum mechanics, we call harmony. What you see as particle interactions, we experience as rhythm and melody. Together, we might be able to compose a song that heals the damage." The concept was so audacious that Marcus felt his heart skip a beat. In all his years of research, he had approached dimensional physics as a purely scientific discipline. The idea that consciousness and creativity could directly influence the fundamental structure of reality challenged everything he thought. He knew about the universe, but humans had built their civilization on challenging the impossible. "What do you need us to do?" he asked. Lyra moved to the control console, her presence causing the mathematical contamination to retreat slightly. When she touched the interface, the chaotic displays began organizing themselves into patterns that were beautiful rather than terrifying. "I need you to think like a human while I sing like one of my people. Your pattern recognition combined with our harmonic manipulation, it might be enough to convince reality to remember its original configuration." Elena lowered her weapon slightly. "This is insane. You're talking about wishful thinking on a cosmic scale." "No," Marcus said, feeling pieces of understanding click into place. "She's talking about consciousness as a fundamental force. If awareness can collapse quantum wave functions at the microscopic level, then maybe sufficient consciousness applied correctly can influence macroscopic reality as well." As Lyra began to sing, her voice produced harmonics that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The sound was indescribable, part music, part pure mathematics, part emotional expression that bypassed language entirely. The mathematical entities stopped their advance, their geometric forms beginning to resonate with her song. Marcus focused his attention on the dimensional breach, allowing his mind to process the chaotic patterns without trying to force them into familiar categories. This was what humans did best, finding order in apparent randomness, seeing connections that pure logic might miss. As he watched, the tear in reality began to make sense in ways that had nothing to do with conventional physics. The breach wasn't random damage, it was a question being asked by the universe itself. The mathematical entities weren't invaders. They were part of reality's attempt to find a new equilibrium after the dimensional boundaries had been disrupted. And Lyra's song wasn't just sound. It was reality offering suggestions for how that equilibrium might be achieved. "I can see it," Marcus whispered, his hands moving over the controls with newfound purpose. "The pattern. It's not about forcing the dimensions apart, it's about helping them find a way to coexist. Working together." Human intuition and alien harmony began to weave a solution that transcended the limitations of either approach alone. The dimensional rift stopped growing and began to organize itself into something more stable, not a wound in space-time, but a carefully controlled gateway that allowed for communication without contamination. For the first time since the disaster began, Marcus dared to believe they might actually save the galaxy. The transformation was spectacular and terrifying in equal measure. As Marcus and Lyra worked together, their combined consciousness began to influence reality on a scale that defied every scientific principle he had ever studied. The chaotic dimensional rift reorganized itself into a stable portal, its edges lined with energy patterns that were simultaneously mathematical equations and musical harmonies made visible. The mathematical entities that had seemed so threatening minutes before revealed their true nature as they responded to the new equilibrium. They were explorers, just as Lyra had been scouts from a dimension where consciousness and calculation were indistinguishable. As the portal stabilized, they began to communicate, their geometric forms shifting into configurations that conveyed concepts like curiosity, apology, and wonder. "They're trying to say they didn't mean to cause harm," Lyra translated, her song continuing to provide harmonic stability to the dimensional interface. "Their reality operates according to different rules. In their universe, observation automatically triggers integration. They thought they were just looking around." Elena lowered her weapon completely, staring at the transformed laboratory in amazement. Where chaos had reigned minutes before, there was now an impossible fusion of different realities existing in harmony. The walls showed glimpses of the mathematical entity's geometric paradise, while the floor reflected scenes from Lyra's crystalline forests. Somehow, all of it coexisted without conflict. "This shouldn't be possible," Marcus breathed, monitoring the dimensional readings on his instruments. "We've created a stable multi-dimensional space that exists according to the physics of 3 different universes simultaneously." "Possible is a limitation," Lyra replied, her voice warm with something that might have been affection. "Your species thinks in terms of what can be done. Mine thinks in terms of what should be done. Together, we can transcend both limitations." But even as Marcus marveled at what they had accomplished, he realized the true significance of their achievement. They hadn't just prevented a disaster, they had fundamentally changed the relationship between dimensions. The stable portal represented something unprecedented in galactic history, a permanent bridge between realities that allowed for communication and cooperation without assimilation or destruction. Word of the dimensional breakthrough spread through the galaxy faster than light itself, carried by quantum communication networks that had been buzzing with emergency warnings only hours before. The reaction was everything Marcus might have expected: wonder, fear, political maneuvering, and scientific speculation in equal measure. The Altarian mathematicians were forced to acknowledge that human intuition had achieved something their centuries of calculations had deemed impossible. The vegan physicists requested detailed specifications for replicating the dimensional harmony technology. Most importantly, delegations from dozens of species requested permission to establish diplomatic contact with the beings from parallel dimensions. Marcus found himself at the center of a revolution in galactic civilization. But what struck him most profoundly was how natural it all felt. Humans had always been bridge builders, finding ways to connect disparate elements into unified wholes. Now they were building bridges between entire realities. 3 months after the dimensional breakthrough, Marcus stood in what had once been Laboratory 7 but was now the interdimensional communication center. The space had been expanded using principles borrowed from all three connected dimensions, creating a facility that was somehow larger than the space it occupied while remaining perfectly comfortable for beings from multiple realities. Lyra had become his partner in every sense of the word: scientific, diplomatic, and personal. Their relationship challenged conventional understanding of interspecies romance, but humans had never been conventional when it came to matters of the heart. Love, it turned out, was another universal constant that transcended dimensional boundaries. The Cosmic Council has approved our proposal for the Multidimensional Research Initiative, she told him, her form shimmering with colors that indicated happiness in her species' emotional spectrum. 50 different civilizations want to participate in exploring the implications of stable dimensional bridges. Marcus smiled, watching through the portal as geometric entities collaborated with crystalline forest dwellers on projects that involved both advanced mathematics and harmonic architecture. We've opened a door that can never be closed, he said. The galaxy will never be the same. Change is the nature of growth, Lyra replied. And your species has always excelled at growing in ways that seemed impossible. As if to prove her point, a group of human children from the station's residential section entered the communications center on a field trip. They showed no fear of the dimensional portal or the alien beings visible through it. Instead, they waved enthusiastically at the geometric entities and attempted to sing along with the harmonic patterns that maintained dimensional stability. One small girl asked Marcus directly, "Can we visit the crystal trees sometime?" "Someday," Marcus promised, ruffling her hair. "When we figure out how to make sure you can breathe their air and they can understand your words." "That's easy," the girl replied with the supreme confidence of childhood. "We just have to want it enough and work together to make it happen." Marcus exchanged a look with Lyra, both of them recognizing the profound truth in the child's simple statement. Humans had always possessed the ability to make the impossible seem inevitable through sheer determination and collaborative effort. Now they were teaching that gift to the galaxy itself, the dimensional breakthrough that had begun with Marcus's mistake had become humanity's greatest gift to the cosmos, proof that barriers existed only until someone decided to build bridges instead. And in the end, that decision would reshape not just the galaxy, but the fundamental nature of reality itself. The universe had learned to dream in harmony, and it would never wake up.